Well, I'm super excited for today's webinar. It doesn't happen that often that up to 345 organizations can get funding to provide healthy relationship education / pregnancy prevention to teens. The biggest thing this means is that if you choose to apply, your odds of winning are significantly higher than probably ever before. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. If you are having difficulty with the audio, go ahead and try calling in at the phone number above. And then if you have any questions, go ahead and enter them in the questions box. So this webinar is being recorded, and I will send you the link after the webinar has been completed. I also wanted to apologize about all of the text that you're going to see on these slides. I actually pride myself on using lots of images and very little text, but given the tight turnaround on this FOA, I thought that you would forgive me if I didn't take the time to make it more visually appealing. So just quick background on me. I'm currently the Director of Programs at the Dibble Institute. I formerly worked at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, where I helped to design the federal grants. So I was the guy that was tasked with writing the funding opportunity announcements that organizations like yourself apply for. I was also the chairperson on grant review panels, so I got to help score the grant applications and see what goes on in those grant review panel rooms. And I provided grantee technical assistance to organizations that won federal funding. I'm hoping that some of the lessons that I learned working at HHS will be helpful to you today as we look at these funding opportunities. And just quickly, a little bit about the Dibble Institute. We are a nonprofit that equips teens and young adults with the skills and knowledge they need to develop healthy romantic relationships now and in the future. We have published a number of programs that have been used by millions of teens over the last 20 some odd years. The programs we publish have gone through rigorous evaluations by numerous universities in the US and around the world. It's actually kind of fun to say around the world, since the London School of Economics started an evaluation on Relationship Smarts Plus a few years ago in Great Britain. Based on evaluations by all of these amazing researchers, we have programs that have been placed on several federal lists for effective programs, including the National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices, and the Office of Adolescent Health's Evidence-Based Teen Pregnancy Prevention Programs. We are especially excited about being included on the OAH list, not only because they are the office that is awarding these current funding opportunities, but also because the program we published, Love Notes, which was written by Marlene Pearson, had the highest reduction in teen pregnancies in the experimental group as compared to the control group of all the sex education programs that are on the list. But I will talk a little bit more about that later. But first, let's dive into these funding opportunities. Also, I realize that this is not a grant, but because it is easier to say grant than funding opportunity, I will probably switch back and forth. Some of what I'm going to cover today is pretty basic, but some of what I'm going to cover should be helpful, even for people that are familiar with how federal funding works. So hopefully both groups will get something out of what I'm about to share. I'm actually pretty confident that my last two tips are ones that you probably won't hear anywhere else, so it'll probably be worth it to stick around until the end of the webinar, if for nothing else than for those two gold nuggets. First thing I would recommend is, if you have not already done so, is to go ahead and download the funding opportunities. When I downloaded my copies, the first thing that I noticed is that they were scanned, which makes it so that you can't copy and paste the text. And since I like to work digital, you can't highlight either. So I converted the files into a PDF that you can copy and paste the text and highlight and search. If you'd like a copy of the files, send me an email and I can share them with you. Everything you need to know is probably in those two documents. Now, I say probably because the Office of Adolescent Health, which from now on I'm just going to refer to as OAH, is going to present a webinar on Tuesday, May 8th at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can get more information on the OAH funding page. That page is also where they will probably start adding a frequently asked questions list. I highly recommend that you attend to the webinar and check for an FAQ list on a regular basis. The reason is that everything they share about the specifics of this funding opportunity they have to make public, which is why they usually just put everything in the FOAs. But if they forget, they have to make the new information public to everyone. As I was taught when I was working at HHS, if you share anything that is not public knowledge, then you lose your job and the person will lose their funding if they win. So all you really need to know is in the FOAs, the frequently asked questions page, and the webinar. So let's cover some of the basics that everyone is interested in. These are actually two FOAs, and both of them are cooperative agreements. I repeat, they are both cooperative agreements. These are not grants. It is really, really, really important that you understand the difference before you put in the time and effort to apply for these FOAs. When I was taught how to write federal funding, we were taught that the government has three main funding mechanisms. The first is a contract, which is basically the government writing out all of the details of what you're going to get paid to do. So basically, they have total control. And if you want the money, you do what they put in the contract. And they always put in the contract that they can change the contract. The second mechanism is a grant, which is the government giving some general guidance and then you coming up with ideas on how you are going to implement it, and then they decide if they want to fund your ideas. And the last instrument is the one that's kind of in between the two, and it's called a cooperative agreement. So they give some guidance, you come up with ideas on how you will implement it, but they also let you know that they could choose to be super involved in how you implement those ideas. The direct quote from the FOAs is, OAH substantial programmatic involvement may include, and then they provide a pretty detailed list of some of the things that they may be substantially involved in. Now, from a practical standpoint, 345 organizations is a lot to be substantially involved with. So how this ends up playing out in the end remains to be seen. But you need to understand that because this is a cooperative agreement, they have the right to change a lot, and you have the right to say yes or turn in your keys. At Dibble, we like to teach that before you get married to someone, you should go in with your eyes wide open, and that the love hormones sometimes makes that difficult to keep your eyes wide open. This case could be similar in that the dollar signs might cloud your judgment about your willingness to deal with everything that a cooperative agreement entails. And don't get me wrong, this is a great opportunity, but you really need to understand that cooperative agreements are a prime example of the old adage that the person who has the gold makes the rules. And because these are cooperative agreements and not grants, it is really important to understand that there probably isn't going to be any wiggle room on trying to slip in a program that is not a sexual risk avoidance program or a sexual risk reduction program. Even if you get the program past the grant review panel and past the final selection committee of political appointees and federal staff, they eventually will find out, and because it is a cooperative agreement, you may end up either losing your award or needing to switch to a program that is SRA or SRR compliant. Now, this is the reason why we at Dibble have taken so much time on adapting Relationship Smarts Plus and Love Notes so that they are SRA compliant. In fact, 7 of the current federal SRA grantees are using the SRA adaptations of both of the programs. So let's look at what sexual risk avoidance means. In the FOA it says, sexual risk avoidance is the natural approach for an emphasis on sexual delay because of the prominence given to primary prevention. And then they give a lot more details of what all that means. And if you didn't think there was enough detail in the FOA, it also tells you that curriculum must be selected with necessary adaptations made or supplementary materials presented in tandem with an established curriculum to address and replicate each of the elements in one of the 2 programs. Now, just a quick clarification. They do not mean programs in the traditional sense of program, meaning a curriculum. Instead, think of these 2 tools as frameworks that the program/curriculum you select should be aligned to. So it is not limited to just 2 curriculums/programs. So for SRA, the tool/framework is the systematic method for assessing risk avoidance tool, otherwise known as the SMART tool, which describes 9 elements essential for effective sexual risk avoidance. We don't have time to go through all 9 elements in this webinar, but I'm excited to let you know that not only do the SRA versions of Relationship Smarts Plus and Love Notes align to all of the SRA guidance in the FOA, but they also align to all 9 elements in the SRA Smart Tool. So the bottom line is, at the bare minimum, when you are selecting a program to use, you should make sure that it aligns with all of the SRA guidance in the FOA and the 9 elements in the SRA tool. If it doesn't, you really are running the risk that you won't win an award. And if you do win, it might be taken away. So what does sexual risk avoidance mean? Or actually, sexual risk reduction mean? In the FOA, it says, sexual risk reduction is the natural approach for an emphasis on cessation support because of the prominence given to reducing risk among sexually active youth. And then it gives a lot more details about what that means. The FOA also says that your approach should be aligned with the other tool/framework for SRR, which is the tool to assess the characteristics of effective sex and STD/HIV education programs. We don't have time to go through all 17 elements, but once again, I am excited to share with you that our SRA/SRR adaptation of Love Notes is aligned with all of the 17 elements that pertain to the curriculum. And we will be able to help you with the elements that pertain to your organization. Once again, if you decide to go with the SRR route, make sure that whatever program you select, that it is aligned with the SRR tool as well as everything else in the FOA that talks about SRR. Because if you don't, you may not win, and if you do, you could lose your award. So now that I've explicitly given you the heads up that these are cooperative agreements and not grants, and have given you the heads up that they really are serious when they say that this funding is for SRA and SRR programs, let's look at them. The first they call Replicating Programs, Tier 1, effective in the promotion of healthy adolescence and the reduction of teenage pregnancy and associated risk behaviors. So from now on, I'm just going to call it Tier 1. It's up to $61 million, and it will be awarded to up to 270 organizations. So basically, if you want to replicate an effective teen pregnancy prevention program, then this would be the FOA you would want to apply for. And if you want to increase the chances that you are going to be funded, you should probably select a program that has already been evaluated and has been shown to be effective at helping teens to prevent pregnancies. And don't forget, it needs to be aligned with SRA or SRR. The lowest amount that you can apply for is $200,000 per year, and the highest is $500,000 per year. Now before you get too excited about $500,000 per year, let's do the math. $61 million divided by 270 organizations comes to an average size award of $226,000. So if they really are serious about spreading the money around to 270 organizations, there will probably be a few that get $500,000, but most will be getting a lot less than that. Also another heads up. Just because you win an award and you applied for a certain amount of money doesn't mean that you will get that amount. I was working with some grantees just last year who found out that in order to accept the award, they had to be willing to work with less money than they had applied for. Now, I'm not saying that that will happen this time, but it is just something to be aware of. Also, the initial award is for 2 years. At the end of the 2 years, you may have the opportunity to apply for even more money, and only current grantees are eligible for that Phase 2 funding. Since the ceiling on that money is $1 million, that means that they are probably planning on cutting loose a bunch of grantees, since I doubt that Congress is going to be sending them more money. Which is why if you choose a DIBEL program, we are going to do everything that we can to help you to be successful so that you make it into the group that gets more money in years 3 and 4. Now, I'm not too worried about it though, because like I said, Love Notes has already been evaluated and had better teen pregnancy prevention outcomes than any other sex education program on the OAH list of effective teen pregnancy prevention programs. And since Love Notes was adapted from Relationship Smarts Plus, we are just as confident that it will achieve the same positive outcomes as Love Notes. Now, something else to be aware of about the Tier 1 grant, and that is that it appears that the research emphasis is more on the process type evaluations rather than the outcome evaluations, which makes sense because outcome evaluations are very expensive. and they place a cap on how much money can be spent on the evaluations in the Tier 1 FOA. So for example, in year 1, you can only spend up to 30% of the money on research. In year 2, it actually increases to up to 50%. The second FOA is called New and Innovative Strategies for Tier 2 to prevent teenage pregnancy and promote healthy adolescence. And from now on, I'm just going to call it Tier 2. This is the one that is up to $21 or $22 million that will be awarded up to 75 organizations. I say 21 or 22 because it says both in different parts of the FOA, but we can always hope for 22 million. The floor on this FOA is $250,000 and the ceiling is $375,000. So if you do the math, the average size is $293,000. Once again, everything about being SRR and SRA compliant applies to this FOA. However, as the title says, they are looking for new and innovative strategies to implement SRA and SRR. The FOA also places a heavy emphasis on outcome evaluations, which is really expensive, and which is probably why they don't place a cap on how much you can spend on your research budget. So if you are interested in doing research, this is probably the FOA that you should apply for. Although, if you have your own program that you want to evaluate, they actually prohibit you from doing your own evaluation. Which is why, if you'd like to evaluate a program, we would love it if you would select one of our programs for your evaluation. Now this FOA is also just for 2 years, with a phase 2 in years 3 and 4. And that, during years 3 and 4, it more than doubles the ceiling up to $1 million, which means they will probably be cutting loose some of the grantees from this one as well, because only grantees from phase 1, meaning years 1 and 2, will be allowed to apply for phase 2, meaning years 3 and 4. And with a ceiling of $1 million, there just isn't going to be enough money to go around. A couple more details about both of the FOAs. Basically, any organization in the U.S. or its territories is eligible to apply. Even if you are a for-profit organization, you can apply for these FOAs. But they prohibit your organization from applying multiple times for the same FOA. So if you have a bunch of great ideas for Tier 1, then you're just going to have to go with your best. Now, there is nothing that I have found that would prohibit you from applying for both Tier 1 and Tier 2. And maybe they will give us some more guidance later. But until they say something otherwise, it looks like you can apply for Tier 1 and Tier 2. Now I want to cover some tips that I learned when I was being taught how to write a FOA, and tips that I picked up when I was on the grant review panels. Tip number 1, don't get overwhelmed with how complex the FOA is. If you have ever done a paint by numbers painting, then you can respond to a FOA. Honestly, think of it as the same thing. Identify the numbers and then put the paint in those numbers just like the FOA asks you to. Tip number 2. They give you in the FOA the exact same scoring rubric of points that is handed to the grant review panel. In fact, the FOA contains everything that the grant review panel has access to. As much as you would like to refer the grant review panel to outside resources like your website, reports, etc., most grant review panels are prohibited from looking at anything besides what is in your application. Tip number 3. That scoring rubric tells you exactly what are the most important elements of the FOA to the political appointees. I was told explicitly by the political appointees what they wanted emphasized, and when I wrote the FOAs, I did that by putting more points in one section over the others. So as you compare the points sections of the two FOAs, you will notice the differences. Tip number 4. Use the points section as an outline when you write your application. The reason is that a grant review panel has a heavy load of applications to read through and not a lot of time. I'm talking literally hundreds and hundreds of pages. So make it as simple as possible for them to find the information they are looking for so that they can give you the full points. Honestly, make things as easy as possible for them to find. If something takes math, then do the math for them. I know one organization who lost a grant because the people on the grant review panel entered the numbers in the wrong order on a calculator and docked the applicant instead of giving them full points. These grant reviewers really are doing the best they can, but they get tired and hungry and they make mistakes. so try to make it as easy as possible for them to find things. The grant review panels that I sat on would have 3 reviewers and 1 chair, and all of us would read all of the applications so that nothing would be missed. But I'll tell you right now, it is easy for them to miss things if you don't use the score sheet as an outline. Tip number 5. Use bolding to help the grant reviewers quickly find the things they are asked to score you on. Literally, copy and paste the language from the points rubric. Put it in bold, and then give them the details. Make it jump off of the page so that when they are scanning, they are easily able to find it. Tip number 6. Submit your letter of intent before May 21st. This may not seem like it would help you, but it does. The reason is that the sooner OAH has a good idea of how many organizations are planning on applying, the sooner they can make sure that they have enough grant reviewers. If they don't get enough grant reviewers, then it increases the number of applications each grant review team has to review, which increases the chances they will miss points that you should have gotten. Tip number 7. Get all of your MOU and other agreements from your partners signed in the next few weeks. People go on vacations, get sick, forget, etc. You don't want to lose points when you have a verbal agreement but no proof for the grant reviewers, so get everything signed ASAP. This also includes getting permission from the copyright owners of any program that you want to use. Now, if you choose to use a DIBBLE program, then we are happy to help you with that agreement. Tip number 8. Answer everything. There are a lot of things in the FOA that do not have points associated with them, but are important for you to include information on anyway. If it says the word should, then take it as if you want to win the grant, you should provide that information, even if there are not points associated with it. And remember, some of those shoulds were put in there by political appointees, and my last 2 tips will explain why that is so important. This is where it comes in really handy to be able to search the FOA, so send me an email and I will send you a PDF that you can actually search the text for with these key phrases like should. Tip number 9. Read the FOA a bunch of times before you start writing your application. Mark it up so that you don't miss anything. And speaking of missing things, if you are not already registered in the federal grant system, as soon as this webinar is over, do it right now. You also have to have a DUNS number, so register for that right now too. All of these things take time. I remember one conversation with a person who put in hundreds of hours on his application but forgot to get a DUNS number until it was too late. Tip number 10. Submit your application at least 5 days early. Stuff happens. Things come up. The federal system crashes. You forget that it says by 6 p.m. Eastern and you're in Hawaii thinking you have until 6 p.m. your time. It doesn't matter if you don't have it all the way done. Submit the application at least 5 days early. At least something will be in. And you can always submit again and again and again as you polish it right up until the last moment. As it clearly states in the FOA, they are only going to look at the last one you submitted, so take advantage of that. The 2 most important tips that you probably won't hear anywhere else, I have saved for last. But first I need to slip in why I think you should seriously consider either using the SRA version of Relationship Smarts Plus or the SRR/SRA version of LoveNotes. I know I'm probably biased, and that's why I want to show you this chart from the outcome of the rigorous random control trial federal evaluation that the University of Louisville did on LoveNotes. The red line going across the middle is the U.S. teen pregnancy rates, and the numbers above are the percent higher, and the one below the line is how much lower than the national average the participants in the LoveNotes group was. What is also significant is that the control group in this study wasn't your traditional control group. It was more like a positive youth development program, which, if you look at the OH list of teen pregnancy prevention programs, usually has a significant positive impact on pregnancy rates. You can see why this may have been the case because in the chart, the highest number in the pregnancy rate was for African Americans in Kentucky. Over 80% of the participants in this study were low-income African Americans from Kentucky. So in reality, there is the possibility that if the researchers had used a traditional control group, the outcomes would have been even more impressive. The other experimental group was a comprehensive sex education program, And while it had better outcomes than the control group, it didn't have nearly the same impact as LevNotes. And I also wanted to show you the OAH list of effective evidence-based programs for teen pregnancy prevention. This is just one of several pages on the OAH list, but the round circles represent each category that the evaluators found the program to be effective in. So for LevNotes, positive outcomes were found in decreasing recent sexual activity, decreasing the frequency of sexual activity, decreasing the number of participants who had sex for the first time, and increasing the number who chose abstinence. And most importantly, as the previous graph showed, significantly decreased the teen pregnancy rate. In fact, only 6 programs had that outcome, and LevNotes was one of them. So here's a chart that just compares the 6 programs that were shown to be effective at decreasing the teen pregnancy rate. The first thing that jumps out to me is how many positive outcomes that the LevNotes participants benefited from. It's also interesting to note that 3 of the programs are positive youth development. 2 of them are 7-year-long programs, and the other one is 9 months. LevNotes is 13 lessons and can take around 13 hours. As of right now, though, I think LevNotes is the only program on this list that is SRA compliant. But if you are interested in one of the others, you should probably check. Since LevNotes is an adaptation of Relationship Smarts Plus, I am extremely confident that the Relationship Smarts Plus program will get the same amazing outcomes. And as I mentioned before, both of the SRA adaptations of LevNotes and Relationship Smarts Plus are currently being used by federal SRA grantees across the country. And as exciting as that is, what is even more exciting is that these 2 programs are comprehensive relationship education programs. So it turns out that if you want to be effective at teaching teen pregnancy prevention, then the research currently shows that it is best to teach a comprehensive relationship education program. And when you do it, not only does it decrease the teen pregnancy rates, but the other evaluations at other universities found that it also decreases teen dating violence and improves healthy relationship skills, along with a bunch of other outcomes. So let me briefly show you the table of contents of both programs. Also, send me an email and I would be happy to send you a free digital review copy of the entire program, because obviously it's a little bit difficult to read the table of contents on this page. But just quickly, let's go through it. So in Lesson 1, what we teach the teens about is about the relationships today. In Lesson 2, it's generally about knowing yourself and self-awareness. Lesson 3 is their expectations for now and also in the future. Lesson 4 is attraction and also about starting relationships. Lesson 5 is principles of smart relationships. And then in Lesson 6, helping them to understand, is it a healthy relationship? Lesson 7, it goes into more detail about teen dating violence and dangerous love. And Lesson 8 is deciding and not sliding, in terms of decreasing the risks of getting into bad relationships and increasing the risks and increasing the chances that you'll end up in a healthy relationship. And then it actually isn't until Lesson 9 that we actually get into talking about sex. And so Lesson 9 and 10 are about talking about sex in pregnancy and STDs and HIV. And then in Lesson 11, go back to hitting communication skills in both Lesson 11 and 12. And then in the last lesson, it's actually quite a unique approach that is very unique to this program. It's called Through the Eyes of a Child. And it helps the teens to think about the impact of their decisions through the eyes of an unborn child. This is the table of contents for the SRA adaptation of Relationship Smarts Plus. And one of the things that you'll notice is, since LevNotes is an adaptation of it, a lot of the lessons are pretty similar. And so as you look through the lessons, you're going to see a lot of things that are pretty similar. And the best way to compare and contrast is just send me an email, and I really am more than happy to send you a free digital review copy so that you can look over both programs. So now, I finally did promise you that I had 2 tips that I doubt that you will hear from anywhere else. So my 2 golden nugget tips are the following. Tip number 11, you're probably going to need to win this grant twice. What I mean by that is that both of these FOAs say that the grant review panel score is just one aspect of who will be selected to win. So yes, you do need to do really well with the grant review panel, but then you have to win the grant a second time, because both of the FOAs say the Director of the Office of Adolescent Health, in consultation with the Assistant Secretary for Health, will make the final award selections. And then they give you some hints on the things that they may take into consideration. But at the end of the day, they are the ones who get to decide who gets these awards, and they can, in reality, use any criteria that they want. And remember, these are cooperative agreements, so it makes sense that they are doing it this way since they have the legal right to change things, and even yank the funding pretty much at any time. So as of right now, the Director of the Office of Adolescent Health is not a political appointee, but the Assistant Secretary is. The reason why that is important is because when I worked at HHS, that means that while the federal staff have input, the final decisions are made by the political appointees. Which brings me to my next tip. Tip number 12. Write your project abstract summary in a way that will knock the socks off of the political appointees, who are probably going to be the ones who ultimately select who gets the awards. In the FOA, it says that the project narrative is the most important part of your application. Well, the project abstract summary is a close second, because it will be impossible for political appointees to read through every page of hundreds and hundreds of applications. But they do have time to read the project abstract summary, and they will probably look a little deeper in the project narrative when they were impressed by the abstract. But if your abstract is not amazing, and if you didn't write it with the political appointees in mind, your chances of them looking deeper in your narrative is not that high. And finally, a bonus tip, and that is to make sure that whatever organization you select to use their SRA or SRR curriculum, that they have the experience and evidence-based program to help you to be successful. So do they have the training capacity? Will they be able to provide technical assistance? Is their program evidence-based? At the Dibble Institute, we know how to help grantees succeed. We have run our own multi-million-dollar federal grants for years and years, and we have helped and trained over 100 organizations with their federal grants over the last 20 years. At the end of the day, our vision is to help more young people make healthy life choices. And we want to help you win your grant so that we can reach more young people and accomplish our vision and mission. We would obviously love it if you were to choose one of our programs. And if you do, we actually have additional tools that we can help you with your application, like logic models, etc. And I also have a few more specific suggestions on what you may want to include in your project abstract that could increase your chances of winning an award. And lots more tips, but no more time. So please do let me know if you are interested in using any of our programs. And I also would love it if you were to share this webinar with lots of people, because the reality is that with the potential for 345 organizations to win funding from these FOAs, it really would be great to share this with as many people as possible. And so I also wanted to thank you for taking time out of your busy day so that I could share this information with you. So if you do have any questions, feel free to contact me. My email address is aaron@dibbleinstitute.org.